In the heart of an otherworldly tale, our protagonist, Hank, finds himself on the cusp of extraordinary change. As the radio hums with the nostalgic tune of Blue Bayou by Roy Orbison, Hank's life takes a joyous turn when he learns he's about to become a father. Surrounded by his enchanting companions Imelda, Sybil and Tabitha, each adorned in their unique styles reflecting their mystical and vibrant personas, Hank's world is filled with anticipation and love. Tabitha, resplendent in borrowed finery that hints at her transformation from a high priestess to a glam rock muse, reveals her pregnancy, sparking Hank's overwhelming pride and happiness. Their bond strengthens as he contemplates the future, his love for Tabitha only growing deeper with this new chapter. Amidst the excitement, Hank faces another challenge, confronting Barney Converse, a figure whose actions threaten the peace. With an invitation to Barney's grand opening of the 500th Joetown coffee shop in Manhattan, Hank plans to expose Barney's potential wrongdoings personally. His partners in crime, Tabitha, Sybil and Imelda, offer their quirky support, with Sybil jesting about using magic to disrupt Barney's event hilariously. In the midst of this turmoil, moments of tenderness and humor shine through, like the encounter with Josie, a kind-hearted cafe owner who gifts them breakfast, and the girls' laughter filling the Jeep as they enjoy the sunset. These scenes illustrate the warmth and camaraderie that binds Hank and his magical fiancées, Tabitha and Sybil, as they navigate the complexities of their extraordinary lives together. The story also delves into the mystical, with Sybil's garden holding secrets and powers, suggesting a deeper layer of sorcery that intertwines with their daily adventures. Hank's journey is not just about impending fatherhood or confronting adversaries. It's a tale of love, loyalty, and the discovery of magic in unexpected places. Ultimately, the novel is a whimsical blend of fantasy and reality, where a modern-day hero balances his roles as an entrepreneur, soon-to-be father, and fiancé to two magical women, all while battling mythical beasts and navigating the intrigues of a world where love and laughter are the most potent forms of magic. This is a story that celebrates the beauty of found family, the strength of unconventional relationships, and the power of embracing the extraordinary in everyday life. Chapter 1. And that song was Blue Bayou by Roy Orbison. Next up we've got a few more classics for you. The radio was singing away in the background, but all I could think about was what my girls had just told me. I was going to be a father. I felt myself swell with pride as my girls giggled and shuffled their feet shyly. Imelda looked dazzling in Tabitha's all-red suede number. The fabric hugged her hips and pushed up her breasts. She looked more like a glam rock musician than a high priestess, but I sure as hell wasn't complaining. Plus I was pretty sure that a magical priestess turned rock musician would probably be every goth's fantasy. Sybil was clad in her usual long green dress that matched her dazzling emerald eyes. She swept a few strands of dark hair out of her face and offered me a smile that lit up her whole face. And then there was Tabitha, who was practically glowing. A few strands of her wispy blonde hair fell into her face as she rubbed her belly. Now I knew why. She was wearing one of Sybil's long black gowns, and why she'd been so nauseous on the trip here. She was going to have my kid, and I was so excited that I couldn't speak. Well, Tabitha finally asked in her glamorous, smoky voice. She raised an eyebrow at me and crossed her arms over her chest. Well, what? I finally laughed. This is the greatest news I've ever been given in my life. I bounded over to the three girls and wrapped my hands around Tabitha's face. I melted into her deep brown eyes as she smiled at me. You did it, Hank, she said with a smile. You managed to knock this noblewoman up. Tabitha, Sybil snickered, and she and Imelda shot a look at each other. I don't know what movie you learned that phrase from, I said through a smile. But shut up. I leaned down and kissed Tabitha's soft, plush lips. I felt her hands run through my hair, and when I pulled back, I saw a smile tug at her lips. I didn't realize until I'd kissed her that my cheeks were practically in pain from how hard I'd been smiling. This was insane. Hank Baker was not only the proud new owner of a moonsword, but he was about to become the proud father of a Lupercalian nobleman. Between Jersey and Lupercalia, things just couldn't get any better. So, I said with a laugh, how long have you girls been keeping this a secret from me? Sybil tooted and waggled her finger. We tried to tell you back in Lupercalia, but you said to wait till we got here. But that was only today, I protested. And I just got back from making my moonsword. But you must have known for a little while. The girls exchanged a look, and Imelda's lily-white skin began to glow with mischief. Well, Imelda said in her enchanting, breathy voice, When you went out on your quest, Tabitha started showing some early symptoms. At first, I thought I was just super hungover, Tabitha said with a shrug. But then I realized that I hadn't even had anything alcoholic to drink. So, something was obviously up. I went through all the protocols that I'd seen my mother do as a young witch, Sybil added. Basically, I checked her complexion first against some of the red flowers in my garden. At first I thought she was trying to insult me, Tabitha added, and the young noblewoman rolled her eyes. But it turned out that my skin did look a little green. Whoa, I said. How did you pick up on that? Here in Jersey it would have been simple enough to just pick up a pregnancy test at a Walgreens. But I was super impressed by Sybil's witchcraft and I wanted to learn more about the Lupercalian way of medicine since I spent so much time there now, and my children probably would as well. Well, she was a mess, Sybil said as she ignored Tabitha's glare. So I had my suspicions. I checked her pulse by squeezing one of her fingers and making a note of her heart rate. Then we did the color test. Those were both positive, so we got a tablespoon of sugar from the cook in the estate and then we had Tabitha pee in a. I think I get the picture, I laughed. I wasn't squeamish, but I could basically get the gist of where this whole thing was going. It's a blessing from the moon goddess, Imelda added, and her face glowed with excitement. Sir Henry Baker has his moon sword, and he will produce an heir. And that's not the only news, I reminded the girls. Oh, of course, Sybil said, and her eyes widened with excitement. What were you talking about with Ava just now? Was it Joetown coffee? That man was an oaf, Tabitha said as she shook her head. No class at all. And terrible leadership skills. Well, that's what we thought too, I replied. So we decided that we're not going to sell to Joetown. We built this business with our own hard work, and I sure as hell don't want to sell out now when things are just starting to really grow. Besides, integrity is important to both of us, and I don't think that's part of the Joetown philosophy. The girls exchanged a look before smiling and nodding at me. I think that's amazing, Hank, Sybil said, and she held out her right hand. I took her incredibly soft hand in mine and squeezed it. I felt a jolt of lightning race up my arm, and I felt incredibly grateful that I had the three coolest women in every dimension on my side. So you girls agree? I asked, and Tabitha and Imelda nodded. I think you're a noble warrior, Hank, Tabitha said as she raised an eyebrow. And coming from someone of my background, that means a lot. Don't toot your own horn, Tabitha, Sybil said with an eye roll. Oh, what? Tabitha asked. I can't point out the obvious. I'm bearing his child for the love of the goddess. Tabitha, Imelda said. We don't need to bring the goddess into every tiny disagreement. You sound like my mother, Sybil said to Imelda, who bit her lip with her long vampiric tooth. The girls exchanged another look before bursting into a fit of giggles. My child was going to have the best upbringing ever. Not only was I going to be the most devoted father I knew, but my little pup would be surrounded by a witch, a noblewoman, and a priestess to keep my little one in check. Couldn't think of a better arrangement. But the very next person I thought of was my dad, who would have slapped me on the back and handed me a cigar if he heard that I was having a kid of my own. And then there was my mom, whose kind brown eyes had been surrounded by laugh lines for all the years I knew her. There was never a doubt that she led a happy life even when times were tough. I knew that my parents would be proud as hell of their children. We had a business we'd built on our own, and I now had a burgeoning family. I just wished my parents could have met their first grandchild. You girls are too much, I laughed. We're so glad that we have you, Hank, the priestess said as she wrapped her arms around my waist. You've given each of us a new life, and for that we will be forever grateful. I'm glad I have you too, I said. You've given me a new life as well. Well then, Tabitha said with a yawn, this is all very exciting, but I'm starved. Now that I'm eating for two, I intend on eating everything I can get my hands on. No change there, Sybil muttered under her breath as we went over to the large silver fridge. Excuse me, what was that? Tabitha asked as she trailed after her. Imelda and I shook our heads at the squabbling girls, but I knew that they loved each other fiercely, and I loved all three lovely ladies just as much, even though they were all remarkably different. And honestly, it felt pretty damn nice not to settle for one type. Oh, nothing, Sybil sighed, and she pulled out a large salami from the fridge. You want some of this, Brizola? I'm sorry, some of that what? I asked as Sybil and Tabitha started to rifle through the kitchen drawers for a knife and a chopping board. Brizola, the green-eyed witch said with a smile. It's an Italian variety of air-dried beef. Sybil, I interrupted her. I'm half Italian-American and I don't even know this stuff. Where did you even learn about all this? Whole Foods, Tabitha answered matter-of-factly, and she slammed a green plastic chopping board on the table. And I was reading a lot about charcuterie boards. They're all the rage right now. I shook my head in disbelief. It was beyond me that my ladies who were basically raised in the 15th century would have a firmer grasp on fancy charcuterie than me, but I just decided to roll with it. This child is extremely blessed, Imelda said as she moved away from me and started to help the girls prepare their charcuterie board. I'd say, Tabitha added, and she shot a smirk at me. With Hank's looks and my noble blood, this child will have the best of everything. And I can teach them about every flower in Lupercalia, Sybil added with a swirl. The witch was holding a sharp, state-of-the-art chef's knife at that moment that I'd bought for the girls from Williams-Sonoma, and when she spun around, both Tabitha and Imelda had to duck in quick succession. Sybil, you crazy witch, Tabitha practically croaked as she covered her head with her hands and knelt for cover under the counter. You're trying to attack a Lupercalian noblewoman, and a pregnant one at that. Do you know what kind of crime you're committing? The young witch placed her knife on the counter and covered her mouth in surprise. I'm so sorry, Sybil giggled. I can't help but dance around when I'm excited. Excellent, Tabitha added as she stood up. Our child can learn how not to act from our resident swine herder. Excuse me, Sybil said and lifted an eyebrow, but I hold some indispensable knowledge of the old ways. I'll have you know, ways to live with nature that the aristocracy don't even know. Of course they don't, Tabitha added with a shrug. We have palaces to live in instead of wooden huts. Sybil's face started to glow red with annoyance, and her green eyes sparked with fury. The witch even balled her hand into a fist, which meant trouble for sure unless I could distract the trio. Ladies, I said and raised my hands. This is not how we want to behave as a family. Sorry, Sybil, Tabitha laughed, but sometimes I just love watching you turn red. It makes the green in your eyes pop. So you keep telling me, Sybil huffed, but she winked at the noblewoman and then went to get a jar of olives from the fridge. While the girls chatted, I let myself imagine life with a child. I'd never really considered the possibility before, but it felt like everything had suddenly changed. I didn't want to think about fleeting luxuries and all that petty stuff anymore. Things were serious now that I knew for a fact that someone of my own blood was going to outlive me, and I wanted to make sure that child would never have to scrape by like I had. You okay, Hank? Imelda asked a few minutes later. I shook my head and glanced at the priestess, who always seemed to have an aura of calm. I let myself soak in the serenity for a moment, took a deep breath, and then offered a smile to my ladies. Yeah, I'm good, I said. Just thinking about how things will change once there's a little one underfoot. I don't want any olives, just the brine, Tabitha insisted as she popped open the jar. Get me a straw. Can I get a please? Sybil asked as she placed a hand on her hip. And, really, olive brine? That's like a dirty martini without any actual martini. I can't have a martini now, Tabitha sighed, and she brought the jar to her lips. But I'm craving the dirty, filthy in fact. I want it so filthy it's sewage. Instead of waiting for Sybil to get her a straw, she merely tipped her head back and drank the juice from the olive jar like it was a can of cola. As a hardwired simple man with simple tastes, I'd never felt so many conflicting emotions in my life. I was amazed, disgusted, impressed, and frightened all at once. Oh, Imelda muttered as she tried to muster a polite smile. Now I know what you're thinking, Tabitha said and swung open the door of the freezer. Why is a woman of such a noble upbringing acting that way? Gee, must have been replaced with a fairy or something. Well, I don't care what anyone thinks. Whatever the baby wants, the baby gets. Her eyes lit up as she grabbed a tub of Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream. Oh, I love that flavor, Sybil muttered. You have to share. The witch pulled a pair of spoons from the cutlery drawer and headed toward Tabitha. The noblewoman scowled, but she accepted one of the spoons and let Sybil take a stab at the ice cream before the blonde started to attack it. You don't want in on that? I asked Imelda. No, she said as she watched the other two. I can wait until we go to the store again. I'll buy some of the little ones so I can have one all to myself. That's probably a good idea, I replied as I watched the other two women scrounge for clean bowls. I guess we're done with charcuterie, Imelda said as she stared at the two slices of brisella that had been cut. Yeah, I said and laughed. It was all so amazing, and I would have been happy to let things continue like this. But I thought about my parents again and I knew there was one thing that would make it better. I needed to make my ladies my wives even if I could only officially have one wife in New Jersey. In fact, I wasn't even sure what the standard was in Lupercalia, though I knew that my good friend Charles only had one wife, as did old Greyback. Imelda, I said, want to help me with something? Of course, she replied as she smiled at me. What do you need? Come with me, I said, and I started to usher her out of the room. Hey, Tabitha called from the other side of the kitchen. The noblewoman had found a can of whipped cream somewhere, and she shook it several times as she gave me a stink eye. Yes, I asked. So you're just leaving without inviting us? The blonde asked. You're having so much fun, I said. I don't think I can match that. Tabitha watched me for a moment, and then she tilted her head back and sprayed cold whipped cream into her mouth. We are having fun, the blonde agreed when she could speak. In fact, we're going to make olive sundaes. What? Sybil stuttered and pulled her bowl close. I'm just having ice cream. Tabitha grinned, plucked a couple of olives from the jar, and dropped them in her own bowl. You two enjoy your ice cream, I said. We'll be back in a few minutes. Good, Tabitha asked, and she beckoned for Sybil to come over so that she could spray whipped cream into her mouth. I led Imelda into the dining room, and then decided to go over to the large glass wall that looked out onto my pool. Are we cleaning the pool? The priestess asked. Because Tabitha told me that. If you suggested that, I have to say we're sick. No, I laughed. We have people for that. Except for that one time, I guess. God, she's such a little lady. Anyway, I have an idea that I want to run by you. It was one of my favorite parts of being a priestess, Imelda said, happily. To offer advice and help people with their problems, but I don't know much about business or New Jersey. I'm not sure. Don't worry, I said, and I patted her on the back. I wasn't going to ask you any questions about the Joetown deal. Oh, thank goodness, she replied. For a moment, I looked out onto the gorgeous backyard and pool. It was still pretty cold out, but the sun was shining brightly and I sighed with happiness. I'd built this wonderful life in New Jersey and Lupercalia, and now I was going to share it with a child. There was only one right thing to do. Hank? Imelda asked, and she tapped my arm to break me out of my daydream. Oh yes, I said and shook my head. Look, here's what I'm thinking. Basically, I've been with Tabitha and Sybil for a few months now. We've grown a lot together, and I've learned all about Lupercalia from them. And vice versa, of course. I gestured outside to my decidedly Jersey-esque backyard, and Imelda nodded. Oh, I know, she said. The three of you have been good for each other. And so I was thinking of asking them to marry me, I said. Imelda's bright blue eyes widened in excitement, and she covered her mouth and started to hop around in a little circle. Oh my goodness, she giggled when she stopped long enough to wrap her arms around me. This is a day full of blessings. I guess that means you like the idea, I said. But I don't want you to worry. Just because we get married doesn't mean you have to leave or anything. I know you've only been with us a week, but I feel like there's a connection there. And the peasants on the estate love having you there. Think they'd riot if you left. You don't need to explain, Imelda laughed. I understand. But I love it. Wedding too much to just sit in the audience and watch my saviors be wed. Without any involvement. Now, Sir Henry Baker, I have a question for you. Oh yeah? I asked suspiciously. Imelda shot a look behind her to see if either of the girls were listening, and then she bent down on one knee. She giggled again and then tried to force her face into a more demure expression, which she failed at miserably. Sir Henry Baker, she said, and she grabbed both of my hands. Call me Hank, I corrected. Hank, she said and batted her bright blonde eyelashes. Will you make me the most happy priestess alive and grant me the supreme honor of allowing me to officiate your wedding? Oh, Imelda, High Priestess of the Obsidian Temple, I said as I held a hand to my forehead. I would like nothing more. Yes, yes, a billion times yes. Well, that was easy, she laughed as she stood up. We grinned at each other in conspiratorial delight, and then I took her glowing face in my hands and kissed her soft lips. I could feel her vampire teeth poke gently against my lips, but the priestess was careful not to draw blood. See? Imelda asked as she pulled away. We just rehearsed it. Look at how well that went. You're right, I replied and then glanced in the direction of the kitchen. Now they just have to say yes. Oh, don't worry, I'm sure they will, Imelda said with a shrug. I'd be surprised if they didn't fall over themselves trying to be the first one to say yes. That should be fun to watch, I laughed. You know, I can't think of a better person to perform the ceremony. The moon goddess made all of this possible. Both my life as a knight in Lupercalia and as a business mogul here. And the goddess gave me the power to save you. The moon goddess is truly magical, Imelda said. But she chooses those whom she blesses with great care, and it is a supreme privilege to spend my days with someone who has been so blessed by the goddess herself. Thanks, Imelda, I said, and I could feel my heart swell with gratitude. So, she said and looked around. Where are you planning to make your proposal? Perhaps on a grassy knoll in the hills of the eastern country? Or maybe in the garden of your estate, where the butterflies flutter and the birds will be singing. Huh, I muttered and looked around. You know, I can't think of a better time or place than right now. Hell, I was on an adrenaline high. We decided to say good fucking bye to Joe Town for good, and I was going to be a father. Why not just complete the checklist? It doesn't seem very romantic, Imelda said and then grinned. But it feels right. Everything about you is unconventional, so why should a marriage proposal be any different? We sauntered back into the kitchen, where Tabitha was chasing Sybil around with a can of easy cheese. I'm not eating that, the dark-haired witch said as she ducked around the counters and tried to hold Tabitha off. I don't think any of the ingredients are from this earth. I'm not asking you to eat it, Tabitha practically cackled. I just want to paint you with it. Tabitha, I chided. My pregnant companion turned toward me and shot me an angelic smile. Hank, she said in her low, breathy voice as she traipsed over. Sybil was trying to chase me around in the kitchen. Can you believe that? A witch chasing around a pregnant woman. If your hormones are going to turn you back into a naughty adolescent, then I have a long 8 months ahead of me, Sybil groaned as Tabitha stuck out her tongue at her. You know, I wasn't actually going to spray you with cheese, Tabitha said. And she looked down at the can in her hands. Or whatever this is. When we get back to Lupercalia, I have to make Tabitha an assortment of herbs, Sybil said, and she wrapped her arm around the blonde noblewoman. I know just the thing that's going to keep you healthy throughout this whole pregnancy, and maybe help reduce some of these stranger urges. You just want to sedate me, darling, Tabitha murmured, because you know that you couldn't beat me in a fight, even if I am pregnant. Sybil rolled her eyes as Tabitha laughed to herself. So, I mumbled and then looked at Imelda for help. Hank has something important to ask you, the priestess said. I thought so, Tabitha said as she turned her gaze on me and Imelda. I know. Scheming when I see it, and I sense that you've been scheming. What's going on? I took a deep breath, glanced at Imelda again, and then knelt down on one knee. Sybil and Tabitha, I said, and I took both of their right hands in mine. Or Tabitha and Sybil, Tabitha said with a sly shrug, and Sybil shot a glare at her. My darling women, I said with a low laugh. I'm not much of a poet, but I know how I feel about you too, and I think I know you both well enough to say that you feel the same way about me. I wouldn't be so sure, Tabitha interjected, and Sybil elbowed her. Shut up, Tabby cat, she whispered. This is not the time for jokes. As I was saying, I continued. Actually, I don't know how else to say this, so what the hell will you marry me? Tabitha and Sybil looked at each other, and their eyes glowed with excitement. For a second, neither of them could speak, and they kept shooting looks at each other and back down at me. Sybil, say something, Tabitha practically choked with excitement. Yes, Sybil laughed, and she squeezed my hand and started to bounce up and down. Yes, yes, we will. Well, looks like I'd completed my checklist for the day. I was an entrepreneur, soon to be father, and now a fiancé to 2 beautiful women. And it was barely noon. Chapter 2. Tabitha and Sybil each took an arm and helped pull me back to my feet. Then, they wrapped themselves around me and kissed me on both of my cheeks before continuing to hop around and squeal. "We're getting married," Tabitha said in the most dreamy voice I'd ever heard come out of her mouth. She was staring into some indistinct point in the distance inside. "That's right," Imelda giggled. "And guess who is officiating?" Both of the girls stopped dancing around and looked at Imelda before beginning to squeal again. Sybil cried. "This is the best day of my life. I'm getting married. And it's going to be the best wedding that Lupercalia has ever seen." "Hey Sybil," Tabitha said with a smirk. "You know you sound like a pig when you do that. Will you be inviting your family's entire pen to the wedding? Or—" "Oh, shut up you old dog," Sybil said as she took Tabitha's hands and swirled her around. I started to laugh, and for a second I caught a glimpse of my future life. With all these women around me, if things were just as fun then as they were now, then I'd be one happy man. "Hank, I can't believe this," Tabitha said, and she looked up at me with her big brown eyes. "You know, my family never thought I'd ever marry. They thought that none of the men in the Lupercalian court would want someone as outspoken as me. But then Hank came and took pity on you," Sybil sang and winked at the noblewoman. "Yeah," Tabitha said, and she lifted an eyebrow. "Anyway, this will truly be the event of the season. A wedding to Sir Henry Baker, the knight chosen by the moon goddess herself? It's truly blessed." "That it is," Imelda declared, and then quickly wiped away a few tears. Hey, I said and placed my hand on her delicate shoulder. "Are you okay, Imelda?" "Oh, of course I am," she said as a last teardrop dribbled down her cheek. "It's just that, I haven't performed a wedding since I was a priestess in the Obsidian Temple. I used to wed all the most important knights and their wives. And now you've given me the opportunity to do what I love. Again." She looked up at me, and the combination of her blue eyes and her glassy tears made me feel like I was staring into a lake on a sunny day. Of course I didn't want her to cry, but at least they were tears of joy. "Well, I'm sure you're the best woman for the job," I laughed as I rubbed her back. "Plus, you're going to have to teach me more about some of the Lupercalian customs so I know what to expect on our big day." I didn't know a damn thing about how to plan a wedding even in New Jersey. I'd been to a couple as a kid, and one as an adult when my buddy Josh married his high school sweetheart. But I had no real idea of how any of it came about, whether it was the selection of the priest, the vows that had been exchanged, or the food options for the reception. Hell, I'd missed the best man's speech at the reception because I'd been too busy sampling the donuts on the donut wall. And now I was going to have a Lupercalian wedding? I had a feeling that there weren't going to be any donut walls or 80s cover bands, and I would need every bit of help I could get. "So," Tabitha said as she suddenly came to a stop and slammed her fist on the counter. "So what?" Sybil asked. "We have to get planning." "Of course we do," Tabitha said. "Hank, how do you feel about getting your ear pierced?" It wasn't a look I'd ever considered for myself, but I wasn't opposed to it as long as I didn't have to wear anything heavy and dangling. I'd probably even be okay with a hoop as long as it wasn't one of those rings that were big enough to squeeze a baseball through. I don't know," I said with a shrug. "I guess I'd be okay with it." "Why do you ask?" "Because you're going to have to get one," Sybil giggled. "Lupercalian men get an ear piercing with a moon silver ring in order to show that they're married." It was news to me, but I racked my mind and started to think of all the Lupercalian men I knew. Old Blueclaw had an earring, and so did Charles. Envisioned the king in my head, and even he had a glimmering silver earring hanging from his bushy ear. "Huh," I said with a shrug. "I guess you're right. But I always thought that those were just like any other jewelry, to show off wealth and power." "Us nobles don't show off our wealth, Hank," Tabitha said, and she crossed her arms. "That would be crass. Says the girl whose father sounds like a cutlery drawer when he walks around," Sybil giggled. "Okay, we do like our moon silver," Tabitha said. "But no, it's not just any old piece of jewelry. Usually the men of the family pierce your ear, but I'd guess you'll have a whole group of Lupercalian noblemen who will be willing to help you out with that part of the ceremony." "I guess so," I shrugged. "But sure, I'll get my ear pierced. Anything to follow the Lupercalian protocol." "Oh, wonderful," Imelda sighed as she fluttered her eyelashes. "And the girls can pick out the rings." I want a floral posy ring, Sybil said. It should bear an inscription on the inside. My mother's ring says, to each new spring with my bud in her. Ring. Oh, I want a flesh opal, Tabitha said. I don't usually like pink, but they're so beautiful, so powerful looking. And I'm a powerful lady. Gosh, I can't wait to rub my marriage to Henry Baker in all those girls' faces who mocked me when we were teenagers. That'll show them. Tabitha, that's not the best motivation, Imelda giggled. But I do understand where you're coming from. Oh, and we can have the little children of Stock Village throwing petals, Sybil added as she jumped up and down. Maybe even Charles's kids can take part. Since Stock was the first place you landed in Lupercalia. And it will take place under the full moon, Imelda announced and lifted a fist in the air. Under the brightest night of the moon goddess. Yes, Sybil squawked. The energy in the room was starting to rise to a fevered pitch, and I was getting a little overwhelmed. The girls' ideas started to get more and more preposterous, though I'm sure I didn't hear half of their plans once they started to talk over each other. I could feel a headache coming on, and the only thing I'd done so far was ask the two women to marry me. Tabitha must have caught the look on my face because she finally lifted the can of easy cheese and whipped cream and crossed them over her head like two swords. She let out a shrill whistle like she was hailing a cab in New York. And the other two women froze for a moment. That's better, the noblewoman declared. The next person who speaks out of turn is going to get a mouthful of one of these. Or possibly both at the same time. That's sick, Sybil murmured. That's disgusting. I'm pregnant, Tabitha said, and she squinted at Sybil. And my taste buds have been ravaged by the bizarre whims of my unborn child. So from now on, anything I say goes. Anyway, I think there's a few things we need to go over that Hank might not know about. Imelda and Sybil shrugged and nodded, and I crossed my arms over my chest. And what might those be? I asked, because I'm barely versed in New Jersey marriage culture, let alone Lupercalian wedding culture. Well, here's one thing, Tabitha said. I'm a very old-fashioned girl and I come from a very old-fashioned family. Ah, Sybil said with a nod as if she understood. Okay. So, Tabitha said, of course we accept your proposal and of course we're excited. But you're going to win the approval for this marriage from Sir Blueclaw and Farmer Foreman. He's just Mr. Foreman, Sybil muttered. We're pig keepers, not really crop farmers. Okay, sure, Tabitha said. Either way, this is serious business. This wedding is unlike any other that I've ever heard of in Lupercalian history. It sounded kind of daunting when she put it like that, but I was definitely more excited than I was scared. She's right, Sybil nodded. You're getting involved with both a peasant household and a noble household, and there are very different traditions tied to each. Figures, I sighed. I can't seem to do anything by the book. But that's good, Imelda encouraged me as she squeezed my hand. You're the most innovative knight in the history of Lupercalia. It's true, Tabitha added. Definitely the most impressive in my generation. But this wedding is going to require some work. You're going to have to put your back into it. Where did you even learn that phrase? I asked with a laugh. YouTube, Tabitha shrugged. I found it on the TV when I was bored. Okay, I said, and I decided not to get distracted again. So I'm going to have to appease two dads. Good grief. Well, you know for a fact that my old man likes you, Tabitha shrugged. But you're probably going to have to prove something to him. I'm not sure what exactly, but I bet it'll be difficult. Maybe even deadly. And just maybe you won't even make it out alive. Sybil reached out and punched her lightly on the arm. You loon, the dark-haired witch said. Stop trying to scare your future husband with your silly exaggerations. Hank, you're going to be fine. Hank, did you see that? Tabitha asked as she tried to stifle a laugh. Your other future wife just punched me, a pregnant woman. I am literally carrying your unborn child, and this woman is trying to attack me. Sybil rolled her eyes and leaned against the counter. Look, she said. For the nobles, there's a formal ceremony attached to asking for a girl's hand. But for my dad, you're going to have to make an offering from your land. What, like beans? I asked. Uh-huh, she said with a nod. And I could even throw some sacred herbs in from my garden, or maybe some of the plants we brought over from New Jersey, so that my parents can grow them too. Easy, I said with a shrug. Unless he hates me, of course. I'm sure he doesn't hate you, Sybil giggled. Even though you did snap up his little girl. And he's an old-fashioned countryman, so he's probably been wondering what kind of craziness goes on at the estate, especially with all the stories that people tell about you. Just show him that you're really normal and promise to take care of me, and he'll be happy. Normal, I sighed. When have we ever been normal? You just have to do it long enough to make him happy, Sybil said. And I know you'll always protect me, so that part should be easy. That's true, I said. Well, it looks like I have my work cut out for me. Even though this was all new for me, I couldn't wait to start on my brand new mission. I had succeeded at every other quest so far, and I knew that I was going to have a ton of fun with this one. Fighting off monsters was one thing, but wooing the parents of not one but two families, it was the quest of a lifetime. And after all, what family wouldn't want their daughter marrying the most precocious savior of Lupercalia? Oh, I love nothing more than a wedding, Imelda cooed, and then she started to swirl and dance around the kitchen. I love nothing more than dairy, Tabitha said, and she sprayed more whipped cream into her mouth. This child is going to be big and strong. Just lay off the easy cheese, Sybil muttered before whisking away the can and plopping it back in the fridge. I'm putting you on a healthy diet from now on. Fine, fine, Tabitha drawled. Guess it's good that we have a folk witch in the house for matters like this. It is, I said. I went over to my pregnant, soon-to-be wife and placed my hand on her belly. Felt an electric jolt race up my arm, and I wondered if that type of connection was normal among the werewolves of Lupercalia. I couldn't believe that my future daughter or son was cooking in there. I'd be happy with either. But there was part of me that pictured myself running around with a little boy pup in the woods of Lupercalia. It's in there, Tabitha whispered. It hears everything. It's not an it, I said with a laugh. But I mean, I don't know what it is yet. I can make a remedy to test that in a few months, Sybil offered. But we won't be able to figure out if it's a boy or a girl this early on in the pregnancy. Fair enough, I said with a shrug. Besides, we've got enough on our plate without adding a gender reveal party to the list. Sorry, a what? Tabitha asked, and her eyes widened as she placed her hand on her belly. Oh, that's something that happens here, I said with a shrug. Basically, it's a big reveal party where the theme is usually something blue or pink. Sometimes people will set off a confetti bomb or drop balloons. If it's pink, it's a girl, and if it's blue, it's a boy. Oh, Sybil said. Maybe we could do that in Lupercalia, but with flowers. Yeah, I said with a laugh. That would probably be nicer than cleaning up all that confetti anyway. Any excuse for a party, Tabitha sighed. Now that I can't drink mead. I think you'll live, Sybil said. Anyway, what's the plan now? Feel like there's so much to do that I don't even know what direction to move in. I agree, I said with a nod. But I guess we've taken care of the coffee business here. And if we want to get married anytime soon, we're going to have to start making arrangements for this wedding as soon as possible. Uh-huh, Tabitha said with a nod. Who knows? My dad might ask you to stand outside his estate for an entire moon cycle. You know, that's happened before. To some nights. Well, there you go, I said with a laugh, even though I hoped to the goddess that he wouldn't make me do something as silly as that. I had a coffee farm, few quests, and an estate to run, and I couldn't afford to stand around for a month as part of some grand romantic gesture. So are we going home? Imelda called in from the dining room where she'd somehow spun during her little victory dance. For now, I said. I have to get these dads' permission to marry my girls. Oh, how exciting! The priestess giggled as she ran back into the kitchen. I just can't wait to start the preparations. Can I bring this back to Lupercalia? Tabitha asked, and she held up the can of whipped cream. Nope, Sybil said, and she delicately pried it out of her hands. This kind of thing has no place in our land. I agree, I said. I'm not sure the moon goddess would approve. Also, I haven't been able to carry metal from this world to Lupercalia. It works fine the other way, but I haven't been able to take any of my electronics with me. Interesting, Imelda murmured with a nod. I'm sure that the goddess is aware of corruption, or maybe there's something in the alchemy of the moon ring that prevents the transportation of metal from this world to our world. Look, I said as I smiled down at the ring. I have no idea of the exact science of how this little ring works. All I know is that it does. And I say we use it right now, Sybil added as she popped the whipped cream back in the fridge. To Lupercalia? To Lupercalia, Tabitha smiled, and she and Sybil linked arms like they were in The Wizard of Oz. Imelda snaked her arm through mine, and I tightened my grip around the girls. All right, ladies, I said. Tabitha, are you going to be okay with this? Interdimensional travel. Do I have a choice? She groaned. Not really, Sybil sighed. But I can give you some peppermint and lemon balm if you're nauseous when we get back. Thanks, Sybil, she said with a smile. Okay, I'm ready. Great, I said and then twisted the ring. Unlike Tabitha, I'd learned to enjoy the weird feeling of traveling between New Jersey and Lupercalia. The ground disappeared from underneath me, and for a second I felt like a comet soaring through space. Felt nice for my body to stop functioning like a normal body for a little bit and just give into whatever bizarre stretch of space and time I was flying through. But as suddenly as my flight had started, it came to an end. I could feel the ground beneath my feet, and I could smell the familiar odor of pine and old candle wax. When I looked down, I saw the wooden floors of my bedroom and I knew we were back in Lupercalia. Oh, Imelda cooed. Looks like you had a special delivery while we were gone. I felt my mouth stretch into a smile when I noticed that the top of my wooden chest was covered in a long burgundy velvet cloth with a green ribbon tied around it. I could just make out the form of something long and slender beneath the folds of fabric, something that was the size of a Lupercalian knight's sword. It's here, I said gleefully. I bounded over to the chest, carefully undid the green bow, and then pulled back both sides of the velvet cloth to admire my handiwork. Oh my, I heard Sybil say from behind me. It looks beautiful. It's amazing, Tabitha added. I've never seen a finer one. I'm so glad she's home, I said as I ran a finger along the blade. And she looks even better than I remember. I grasped the Casanova-shaped handle and lifted the sword. It was one hell of a lot heavier when I was in my human form rather than my hybrid form, but I was still strong enough for the job. That's my knight, Tabitha drawled as she studied the blade. See? My father is going to accept your proposal without a hitch. You weren't even raised here, and yet you have the moon sword already. How could he possibly say no? I have no idea. I laughed as I turned the sword from side to side and watched it glint in the afternoon sunlight streaming in from the window. But I'm sure old Blueclaw will have some crazy task for me to perform. After all the villains you've defeated, I don't think you'll have a hard time completing whatever challenge he gives you, Imelda said. Damn, I sighed. I think it looks even better than I remembered. I have to admit, I'm feeling pretty proud of myself right now. As you should be, Sybil said as she sauntered to the window. And it's such a beautiful day. Maybe you could test it out. I'm sure there's something around the estate that needs to be cut or pruned. You can't use it to prune coffee plants, Tabitha said and rolled her eyes. It's a moon sword. Maybe we could just go for a nice walk, Imelda suggested. I love the sunshine now that my body can withstand it. It was so horrible having to stay inside all the time as a vampire. I hated being allergic to the light. The priestess joined Sybil at the window, but the dark-haired witch turned to me with her brow furrowed and her emerald eyes glowing in concern. What is it, Sybil? I asked. I'm getting kind of a weird energy from you right now. Nothing too serious, she said. It's just, something just feels wrong. Oh, that's not mysterious at all, Tabitha sighed. Is something wrong with the estate? I asked as I walked to the window. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. The coffee bushes swayed in the light breeze, birds sang in the trees, and the scent of warm grass drifted in through the slight crack where the window had been left open to air out the room. It took me a moment to realize what was missing. There was nobody in the fields, and no one working the grounds around the manor. There wasn't a single human to be seen. Where is everyone? I asked. Ah, Tabitha tooted as she peered over my shoulder. Maybe today was a holiday that we forgot about. Imelda, are we at a special place in the moon cycle? Nothing today, I'm afraid, Imelda said as she shot me a concerned look with her icy blue eyes. You don't think that Clancy has anything to do with this, do you? Maybe he marched all his peasants back to his lands while we were away. No chance, I said, and I almost laughed. His duel with me was purely performative. I know that he knows the workers are mine fair and square. Then where the hell are they? Tabitha asked. This was indeed pretty fucking weird. Usually I could hear kids playing or the occasional bark from Casanova along with the normal sounds of the farm, but there was none of the familiar noises, and no indication of what had happened. For a second I imagined some kind of rapture situation where the moon goddess had taken all of my workers, but she'd given me many blessings and I didn't think that she'd really take all of my hardworking peasants away from me now. Well, this is pretty damn strange, I sighed. They're all good hardworking families, so I highly doubt they'd just walk out. Plus they were here when we left. Suddenly, I heard something clang downstairs followed by several voices that were trying to whisper. The sound reminded me of a pot falling to the floor. But the whispers probably belonged to my workers. That sounded like movement, Tabitha said with a shrug as she headed for the door. Come on guys, time to do our Scooby best and go investigate. Oh no, Sybil said, and she pulled Tabitha back. Now that you're pregnant, I'm making a rule. Hank goes everywhere first. He's proven that he's more than capable of handling anything that might attack us, so there's absolutely no reason for you to take the lead, even if you are a blue blood. Okay, fine, Tabitha groaned. But it doesn't sound too dangerous. Maybe they're having a surprise party for my pregnancy. You told the staff before me? I groaned. Gee, thanks. No, don't worry, we didn't, Tabitha assured me. I just like the idea of a surprise party. Noted, I said as I stepped past her and opened the door. I paused in the hallway for a moment as I waited for more sounds. One of the advantages of being a werewolf was that I had much better hearing even in my human form. But the place was still as quiet as a graveyard, though I could sense nervous energy from downstairs. I beckoned for the girls to follow me down the stairs, and we sauntered through the foyer, down the dark wooden hallway, and finally into the kitchen. To my great shock, all of the house staff were huddled inside. Some of the ladies were crouching in their dresses and holding wooden spoons and metal pans up to their breast in fear. Even the laundress was holding a giant fork, like a sword. Afternoon, ladies, I murmured, and my girls exchanged a confused look. Is there something I should know about? Is this a game? Tabitha quickly interjected, and the staff shot nervous looks at each other and shook their heads. Sir Henry, the laundress said with a shudder. You've come at the perfect time. We're terribly sorry, Miss Sybil, the head housekeeper quickly added. But there was nothing we could do. Sorry? Sybil asked in a low, gentle voice. Why are you sorry? What has happened? It's your sour plums, the young laundress said. We don't know how it got in, but there's a large opalescent serpent outside. One of the farmer boys found it eating plums, and some of the men tried to scare it away. But you see. Oh dear goddess, Sybil said, and the dark-haired witch brought her head into her hands. Those are not ordinary plums. It was beginning to feel like my favorite, which was cursed to always accidentally poison or drug someone with her creations. Oh great, I groaned. There's a giant serpent wreaking havoc in the garden. And I'm guessing your plums did what? Those sour plums give the person who eats them magical properties for a short time, Sybil said, and she started to hyperventilate. They respond to the angle of the sun, so no two plums will react in exactly the same way with the light, and no two plums will grant the same powers. If the serpent ate more than one plum, then he's probably got all sorts of powers. This just keeps getting better and better, Tabitha muttered. A serpent full of unpredictable powers. And here, I thought I was having a surprise party. The reptile was bewitched for certain, Sir Henry, the laundress said. He was gnashing his fangs and making strange spirals. It was like something from a different world. We were terrified. And so everyone is in their houses? Yes, sir, the head housekeeper said. Some of the men were trying to fight it away with shovels, but it started to spit venom that could melt metal. That's when it went into the moonbeam fields. We were hoping you would return soon so you could deal with it. Well, of course I can, I said with a nod and turned to the girls. Guess it's time to kick some. Wait, what did you call it again? Opalescent serpent, the laundress said without dropping her hand. That's what it is. It's a large white snake that glimmers silver in the light. Awesome, I said with a nod. Time to kick some opalescent serpent ass. Chapter 3. As I ran out of the kitchen, I shook my head and closed my eyes for a few seconds. I could feel myself start to grow taller, and a new electric energy pulsed through me. When I opened my eyes again, I was in my hybrid form and I was ready for a fight. But not without my armor. I clambered up the stairs and headed straight back to my room to put on my newly engraved armor. I'd gotten better at pulling the stuff on unassisted, which was certainly a time saver in situations like this. Pulled on my breastplate and started to reach for my old sword, but then I saw the moon sword flash in the afternoon light. Guess it was time to take my brand new baby for a spin. I clasped the long, heavy sword in my hand and bounded down the stairs again, where all three of my women were waiting for me in the main foyer. Sybil in particular looked the most nervous, and the dark-haired witch clasped her hands to her mouth and kept looking between the other girls for some kind of assurance. "Hank, you really have to be careful," the witch said. "Yeah," Tabitha added as she rubbed her belly. "Sybil filled those plums up with crazy witch juice. There's no telling what that snake can do." "Shut it, Tabitha," Sybil shot back. "Am I wrong?" Tabitha asked. "Well, to be honest," Sybil said and then sighed. "She's not too far off. Those sour plums contain properties that will imbue the opalescent serpent with all sorts of magical powers." "It's such a shame," Imelda murmured. "Usually, opalescent serpents are quite docile. But if it's bewitched, that's the end of it. There's no coming back. When animals digest that much magic, it needs to be slain for the good of the estate." "Look," I said as I headed for the door. "I promise it's going to be okay. Sybil, please don't feel bad about the plums. How could you know that they were going to end up in the belly of a giant snake? And don't worry about me. I'll be just fine." "We know you will, Hank," Tabitha called after me as I swung open the door of the house. I nodded as I stepped outside, and then I slammed it shut before one of the girls decided to join me. I stood still for a moment as I looked around the estate, but there was still no sign of humans or snakes. Actually, if I hadn't known there was a giant magical snake somewhere on the grounds, I would have found the whole thing very calming. "Figures," I muttered. "Why would it be nice enough to just throw itself on my doorstep? Now I'll have to try and find it on my own." I slowed my breathing and tried to tune into my super wolf senses. There was rustling to the left, and I heard a few twigs snap. I took a few steps forward and held the sword in the strike position. It shined so brightly in the sunlight that it almost blinded me, and I took note to pay attention to that later down the line if I was ever in battle on a particularly sunny day. There was definitely something to my left, so I took a few breaths and prepared to strike. One of the bushes started to shake and I growled in anticipation. At least the hunt wasn't going to take all day. I raised the sword to deliver the death blow just as something jumped out of the bush. But instead of silver scales that glittered in the light, I was met by soft black fur. I sighed as I watched my direwolf Casanova bound right up to me to deliver a big slobbery kiss. "Casanova," I groaned. "You scared the shit out of me. Why are you out when there's a dangerous enchanted snake lurking around our property?" The direwolf seemed to lift an eyebrow and pant as if to say that he was waiting for me to come along and slay the beast. "All right, Cass," I said and patted his head. "Let's take care of this thing." He wasn't wearing a saddle, so I assumed his keeper had fled back to his house when he got news of the snake. But luckily I was strong enough to ride bareback, so I hopped on top of him and grabbed a few clumps of his dark fur. "Let's go, boy," I said, and I gave him a little nudge with my heels. "Let's check the fields first." Casanova headed right, and we swerved around the castle toward the fields of coffee bushes. There weren't any obvious signs of the snake like broken branches or a trail through the soil, but I noticed that even the wild animals were staying away from the field. We started to patrol along the edges of the field, though I didn't hear, see, or smell anything unusual until we neared the peasants' houses. I could see dozens of terrified people watching me through the windows, and while the smaller kids waved excitedly when they saw me, most of the people were too scared to do anything besides clutch their hands. I could smell their fear, though, even through the heavy glass. This was a lot of pressure. Not only were all eyes on me to slay the snake, but I had an audience too. Suddenly, one of the doors flew open, and a woman in a pink apron ran out of the house toward me. "Aaron!" a man screamed behind her, and a chill raced up my spine. "I don't care, Bill," she cried, and she ran over to me. "Hey," I said, and I met her in the middle. "It's dangerous out here, you know. There's My son is missing, she said, and she swept her hair out of her face. Shit. A loose snake and a missing kid? That sure as hell didn't sound good. What do you mean? I asked. We did a head count, he's not here, she panted. We don't know where he is. I'll find him, I said. Don't you worry. Oh man. The last thing I wanted was for a kid to get eaten by a giant snake. On my property. It would have been completely tragic to have that kind of thing happen to the peasants, and I'm pretty sure it would haunt the estate forever. The sun beat down on us and I could feel myself start to pant. It was a hot day and the armor and fur made it 10 times worse. I wanted to make sure that this snake was gone as soon as possible, if only so I could head inside and grab an ice-cold cup of water. You smell anything, Casanova? I asked my direwolf just to double-check that I hadn't missed anything. The direwolf whined in response, and I knew that we weren't in luck at this side of the estate. Then it's probably moved out of the fields, I said. Let's head the other way. Maybe this thing just slithered away or gave itself plum poisoning. Who knows? Casanova trotted past some more of the houses, and a few kids waved at us. Before we made our way back to the front of the estate, the sun was high in the sky, but I wanted this pest eradicated from my estate. Before we even risked reaching the evening, there were so many kids on the estate that if any of them had a run-in with a giant enchanted reptile, I'd be heartbroken. Come on, Snakey, Snakey, I muttered, and I guided Casanova toward Sybil's garden. The peasants had last seen the snake among the coffee bushes, but maybe it had liked the plums so much that it had decided to go back for a few more. Didn't think I would have missed a giant silver snake in her garden, but maybe it had found a place to hide out of sight while it devoured the last of the plums. When we reached the fence that surrounded the garden, I could see that the snake had made a beeline for the plum tree, because all of the other flowers and fruit were intact. Her mysterious herbs and berries that I couldn't even identify had been left unscathed, while the small sour plum trees had been completely ravaged. There were plum pits everywhere, and the flesh of sour fruit stank in the sunlight. I sighed as I saw that the juice of the plums actually sparkled gold. Yep, those were enchanted all right. It was hard to believe that I'd gone from an actual business meeting to having to deal with the repercussions of bewitched fruit in the course of one afternoon. But damn if I didn't love the life I was living, even though it didn't seem real to me at times. I nudged my direwolf into the garden, but there was no sign of the snake anywhere. I checked under every hedge and bush just to be sure, but the only snake I found was a small green garden snake that quickly slithered back into its hole. Let's check the gate, I said, and guided Casanova away toward the main gate. The direwolf moved silently across the grass, though I didn't think we needed to worry about being stealthy. After all those plums, the snake was probably too crazy to run away from a knight with a moon sword. I'd nearly convinced myself that the snake was gone when I saw something glint out of the corner of my eye. I pulled on Casanova's scruff so he would slow down, and then I squinted at the spot where I thought I'd seen the flash. But whatever had been there was gone, and I growled in frustration. Come on, I said as I looked around for another sign of the snake, which I found when I heard a maniacal hissing noise from one of the bushes. A moment later, a 12-foot white snake that was as thick around as a full-grown anaconda rose up out of the bushes like a helicopter and wiggled frantically back and forth. And in its grasp was a tiny peasant boy who looked like he was about 7 years old. The snake's hiss was so loud that it almost drowned out the choked cries of the red-faced boy. Help! He shuddered as he raised his fat little hands in the air. No fucking way. Not on my watch. Shit, I said, and I hopped off of Casanova. For a moment the snake stopped and looked down at me. It opened its mouth to reveal perfectly white fangs, but its eyes were clouded and black with magic. I raised my sword to strike, but Casanova suddenly launched himself at the snake. I felt a moment of panic, even though I knew the direwolf was a strong fighter. But the snake was practically vibrating from the magic, and I wasn't sure what all its crazy powers were. The creature was so distracted by Casanova's advance that it immediately uncoiled from the child. I hunched down and ran toward the kid, who in a moment of adrenaline had clambered to his feet. Sir Henry, he coughed. I thought I was going to die. Can you run? I asked the scruffy kid, who just nodded at me. Yes, I could run to the end of the world to escape that. Then run home now, I instructed him, and he bolted back to his house and wheezed all the way. Now time to take care of this fucker for good. The snake whipped back before the direwolf could clamp his jaws around it, and then it raised up until it looked like a vertical pole. It towered above Casanova, and I could see that its thick belly was full of little round masses. Fucking magic plums, I muttered. The snake's tail started to flip back and forth like a dog's, and it thudded against the ground with each stroke. Direwolf and snake stared at each other for a second, and then the snake reared back again as it prepared to strike. But Casanova knew what the snake was planning, so he lunged forward and sank his sharp teeth into its neck. His yellow fangs pierced the skin of the snake, but for some reason no blood trickled down the pale silver scales. Ah fuck, I said and charged toward the battle. The snake threw his head in the air, opened its mouth and started to screech, so loudly that I stumbled back a step and put my paws over my ears. I'd never heard a snake screech before, but I absolutely fucking hated it. I wanted this serpent dead and quick. The sound died away and the snake started to unhinge its jaw. That was bad enough, but the magic must have given it some extra width because the thing kept stretching until it was about 2 feet wide. It was wide enough that I could see that the inside of its mouth was actually blue except for the black tongue, which flickered in and out of its mouth. When the snake locked eyes with me, I could have sworn that its gaping maw was smiling at me. I started to swing my moon sword at the same moment that the snake lunged toward me. I managed to graze one side with the tip of my blade, but I had to dodge to the right to avoid the fangs. I spun around as I started to raise my sword again, but the snake was just as fast. Its wide-open mouth was plunging toward me again, and there wasn't time to do anything other than roll out of its way. The snake's head smashed into the dirt next to me, and so much dirt sprayed up that I wondered if it might have killed itself. But the head swung back into the sky, and 2 beady black eyes locked on me again. No more plums for you, I growled as I brought my blade across its exposed belly. At first, I wasn't sure that my blade had done damage as the snake hung in the air above me. Time stood still as the snake and I snarled at each other, and then a thin blue line appeared just below the head. A moment later, the head started to wobble, and then it tumbled into the dirt while the rest of the body collapsed in a heap. Blue blood started to spill into the ground, and I could see some of the plums that still had to be digested. Beetlejuice, I said as I stared at the unhinged mouth. Cripes, this thing could have been in the movie. Casanova sniffed at the body and then pawed at the ground. When he was satisfied that the snake was dead, he came to stand by my side and nuzzled my hand. Glad that's over with, I said. But we might have to talk to Sybil about covering the more dangerous parts of her garden with nets or something so we don't have to keep dealing with problems like this. Casanova gave a happy bark of agreement and then looked up at me. He grinned, and I could feel his need for a quick pat through our bond. Sure, I said as I ruffled his fur. Okay everyone, it's dead. It took a moment, like the people weren't sure they really believed me, but one by one the doors started to open, and everyone else started to emerge. Some of the men started to walk toward me, but the first person to reach me was Sybil, who burst through the front door of the manor like a green whirlwind. Hank! Sybil yelled as her feet crunched against the gravel. Are you hurt? Hey Sybil, I said. And no, we're fine. Let me get a look at that snake, she panted when she reached me. Feel free, I said and stepped back. Oh wow, she said as she leaned over the corpse. It's a big one, I said, and I'm afraid it got to most of your sour plums. But on the bright side, it didn't look like it went for anything else in your garden. This is wild, she muttered and bent down. Usually opalescent serpents live in rivers and they hunt small animals. Not plums, that's for sure. Well, your magic plums obviously had something to them, I said. Shame we'll never find out. It's probably a good thing, she said. Maybe I was getting too powerful for my own good. Before I could respond, several of the servants and field workers reached us. There were a few gasps as they saw the size of the snake, and several of the men shook my hand. Sir Henry, a man called Andrew said. Thank goodness you came when you did. We were worried we would have to send for you, but we weren't sure how. I'm glad I arrived when I did, I replied. The servants obviously knew that I left and arrived at the house by mysterious means, but nobody asked what they were. That was one of the perks of being a noble protector of Lupercalia, though I did worry about what other creatures might invade while I was in New Jersey. Maybe it was time to work out a way to communicate between my two worlds, although I wasn't sure how to do that since I couldn't bring a cell phone with me to Lupercalia, and there weren't any cell towers here to begin with. We will remove the body, Andrew announced and then shook his head. I've never seen anything like this before, sir. This is quite the creature. It's my fault, Sybil sighed. My magic garden once again. Don't feel bad, Sybil, I said. We just need to find a way to keep it safe from curious creatures, like those nets they use to keep birds from stealing grapes. I'm sure I could come up with something, she said as she glanced back at her garden. I have to say I didn't know that snakes had blue blood too, I said. Turns out it isn't just the nobles. Who said they aren't snakes? Sybil replied and giggled. Tabitha strolled up then, though she must have heard our exchange. She crossed her arms and frowned at us in disapproval until she saw the very large snake. My goodness, you could start another business on the side, Tabitha said. Sir Henry Baker, savior of Lupercalia, moonbeam farmer and pest control specialist. Pest control? Andrew asked. Just something from my old hometown, I replied quickly. It's the term used to describe people who help keep rats and such out of people's homes. Ah, Andrew said and nodded. I guess that would make you a serpent control. Serpent control, I laughed. I like that. If you like, sir, I can see that your sword is properly cleaned, Andrew added. I know moonsilver won't tarnish or be damaged, but it's such a nice blade, it deserves a proper cleaning. Thanks, Andrew, I replied as I handed him the sword. Does that snake have blue blood? Tabitha asked as she leaned in closer. Of course it does, Sybil said and winked. You, Tabitha said with a shudder. Where's Imelda? I asked as I looked around. Is she still inside? Imelda doesn't really like snakes, Sybil sighed. I think she had her fill of dangerous creatures when she was a vampire. Understood, I said. If you've got this under control, I'd like to clean up a little bit. I've got some of that blood on me. We can handle this, Andrew assured me as two men arrived with large axes. Just be careful about the venom, I warned. The men nodded, and after a brief discussion, they started to hack away at the body. It was clear they knew what they were doing, so after a moment I started to pad back to the house. What a day it's been, Sybil said as she and Tabitha fell into step with me. You're the bravest knight in the kingdom, Hank, Tabitha said. But Sybil, what on earth possessed you to grow those fruits? I thought they would have some healing properties, Sybil said. But it looks like the effects are too varied. I'm not sure I can find a way to separate the good from the bad. I'm sure if anyone can, it would be you, I said. But maybe we could set that experiment to the side for now. Sybil nodded, but her eyes had a faraway look, like she was already working on a crossbreeding program to eliminate the bad side effects. I sighed and then watched as Casanova ran over to some of the children who lived on the estate. I knew he was popular with the kids, and I saw how excited he was when he bounced around a group of blonde children who held their fat little hands in the air and giggled and cooed at the big dog. Maybe we can have a quiet evening, I said as I pulled the front door open. Or not, Sybil said with a grin. What? I sputtered as I saw that Imelda and the household staff had gathered in the entryway. Everyone was grinning, and most of the people held up white candles. It was such an odd sight that I blinked a couple of times to make sure I wasn't suffering a hallucination from the snake blood that had dripped on me. Congratulations, the group of peasants sang, and I watched as Sybil and Tabitha turned to each other and started to giggle. Tabitha, it's your surprise party, Sybil cooed, and she put her long lean arm around Tabitha and held her close. This is the best day ever, Tabitha shouted as she jumped up and down. I looked over at Imelda, who held her hands out for Sybil and Tabitha to join. Yep, these were the best women that a guy could ask. Chapter 4. One of the cooks produced a metal tray of cookies that were cracked orange and seemed to have dried apples in the middle. Ginger cookies, Sybil said as she plucked one from the tray. My favorite. I took one of the cookies and quickly shrank back down into my human form. Before plunging it in my mouth, tasted amazing like everything that came out of the Manor's kitchen. The flavors of ginger, cinnamon and crispy apple danced around on my tongue, and I grabbed another cookie before they all disappeared. Hank, Tabitha whispered. I saw that. Saw what? I asked, and I shoved another cookie in my mouth and grinned as I chewed. That's not very knightly, Hank, Tabitha murmured. You can't be caught dead doing that around my father. As if you're any more ladylike, Sybil said as she took another bite of her cookie. If he'd seen you earlier, he would have beheaded you. One of my most noble qualities is my ability to know just how and when to behave, Tabitha shot back, and Sybil rolled her eyes. I should get cleaned, I began. Nonsense, Tabitha cooed. You're fine. I decided to take a little break from all the intense proposal planning and just let the joy of the party wash over me. The girls danced with some of the kids while servants told tales of their own weddings. Imelda talked to the servants and nodded profusely about something to do with the moon goddess while Sybil sidled up to me and snaked her arm around my waist. So, I said to the young witch. So, she giggled back. What's next? Well, it feels like it should be nightfall because this has been the longest day of my life, I sighed. But in reality it's only just past noon, so after this party I think that we should probably get started on approaching your fathers. Well, first things first, you're going to have to look smart, Sybil laughed. But I think your armor is too formal. My family are simple country folk. I said with a nod. And I have to bring the beans, so to speak? She agreed. That's the way to propose to a peasant girl. All right, I said, and I sought out one of the young page boys from the servants. Well, I'll slowly get everything together while this nice little gathering runs its course. Ernie, I said, and I called over a lithe, freckled boy with curly flaxen hair. His eyes lit up when he saw me gesture to him, and he practically skipped over. That was a most noble feat, Sir Henry, he said in a high-pitched voice. We were all watching from the window. None of our fathers could catch the serpent, but we're glad we have you. Well, it's in the job description, I laughed. But I have a question. Could you get the men to collect me 2 horse worth of moonbeans and attach them to a bundle for Casanova to take into town? 2 horse worth coming up, the boy said, and he fumbled with the handle of the front door before running outside. 2 horse worth? Sybil asked, and she blinked a few times. Her eyes were glowing bright green with excitement, and she crossed her arms. Well, yeah, I said. The only real Lupercalian measurements I knew were either sacks or horse worth. And 1 horse worth was considered a lot, so surely 2 horse worth would be more than enough to convince Mr. Foreman that I was the guy for his little girl. I mean, hell, not only could I supply a cup of coffee for every meal at this point, I could have probably built her a house made with coffee beans if I felt like it. Hank, they'll never have to fetch their own moonbeans again, she laughed. It won't offend them, will it? I asked. I'm not trying to buy you or anything, I've just got a lot of beans. Of course not, Sybil said, and she shook her head. They'll be most grateful for the beans. Maybe you'll even get a pig in return, Tabitha said, and the mischievous blonde sidled up to Sybil. Oh wait, looks like you already did. I could see that coming from a mile off, just so you know, Sybil replied and rolled her eyes. All right, ladies, you get ready for this journey to stock, I said. I'm going to make myself look good for Mr. Foreman. I flashed a smile at the girls and then darted back up the stairs. I was a little disappointed that I couldn't wear my armor because I was pretty impressive in it even as a human. But I understood Sybil's point, so I peeled off my armor, set it on the mannequin, and then opened my wardrobe. There wasn't much variation to my Lupercalian clothing, but I wanted to look sharp, so I pulled out a pair of navy blue leggings and bright red socks. Pulled on the cotton leggings, my boots, and a dark red tunic that would make me look like I had just stepped out of a tapestry. I pulled the tunic over my head and decided to put my chainmail back on just for a little flash. I didn't need to wear my full armor, but a little bit of metal was fitting since I was a knight. I took a quick look in the mirror and decided I was looking rugged and handsome AF. I had the beginnings of a beard, and my dark hair was starting to curl a little just above my eyes. I hadn't cut it in a couple of months, but the new look certainly seemed appropriate for Lupercalia as well as my new persona back in Jersey. But I don't want to look too gruff, I muttered. I spotted a glass bottle of water with rose petals that Sybil kept and splashed some of it onto my hands. Then I ran it through my hair, and after another quick check in the mirror, gave myself a thumbs up. I made my way out of my room and back down the stairs where the shower was still in full swing. I grinned as I took in the scene, and I noticed that several of the kitchen ladies flushed pink and started to giggle when they spotted me. What is it? I asked with a smirk. Is there something on my face? Yeah, your handsomeness. Imelda guffawed, and her skin glowed white with lust. Imelda, if you're going to hang around with us, you're going to have to come up with some smoother lines than that, Tabitha said with a laugh. The door opened again, and the young flaxen-haired boy peeped in and beckoned toward me. Sir Henry, Casanova and the bundle are ready, the boy whispered. Perfect, I replied. All right, ladies, let's get going, shall we? Oh, I can't wait, Imelda said, and the blonde priestess twirled her way to the door. The girls and I followed her out the front door, where we found Casanova with a large burlap bundle belted around his stomach. The direwolf looked enormous when I was in my human form, and I rarely rode him while I was just plain Henry Baker. But the girls had made it clear that I had to ask for their family's permission while a human, and besides it was good exercise. I managed to swing one leg over Casanova's back, though it felt like I was straddling a buffalo. I patted the direwolf once I was comfortable, and then I reached down for whoever was going to sit behind me. I claim the seat right behind Hank, Tabitha declared as she took my hand. Because I'm the pregnant one. Fair enough, Imelda replied as she and Sybil climbed up. But we'll remember that when one of us gets pregnant. Are we ready to go? I asked as I felt a blush creep up my neck. Let's ride, Hank, Sybil said. And we'll see what my dad says. The gate was already open, and Casanova pawed at the ground like he was ready to run for miles. With a gentle nudge, the direwolf trotted past the gardens and the fields toward the gate. The scent of coffee followed us, even after Casanova ran through the gate and started to gallop. Even though we hadn't been gone long, I was glad to be racing through the hills of Lupercalia again. The wind whipped through my hair, and I could hear the girls laughing behind me. I felt Tabitha squeeze my waist tighter as she nestled her head into my neck and practically purred into my ear. You remember how to get to Stock, don't you? She teased. Or are you going to need my navigational skills to guide your way? Don't worry, Tabitha, I laughed. I think Casanova could find his way to Stock even if we blindfolded him. The giant pup growled in agreement as he took off toward the west. The small village was where I had first arrived in Lupercalia, and the royal castle was just beyond that. We rarely stopped in Stock these days, so there was a feeling of nostalgia as the village appeared in the distance. The small specks slowly materialized into cottages and even a few large houses. Smoke trailed from the chimneys and joined the gray clouds that had started to fill the sky. Despite the threat of rain, I was grinning as we charged toward the small collection of homes. After all, we were here so that I could ask the most important question I'd ever asked anyone in my life, and I couldn't wait to see the look on Sybil's dad's face when I did. I pulled back slightly on the reins to slow Casanova to a trot. By now the town of Stock was fully in view, and I could see the good citizens as they went about their everyday labors. Cobblers and iron workers smashed with their hammers while a group of women sat nearby and spun wool while they watched the toddlers. There were people in the nearby fields, and pig noises became the soundtrack for our ride. Casanova finally slowed down to a walk when we got to the end of the village. The locals all knew us, but that didn't stop a few of the women from whispering as we rode along the street. Hey, Maria, Sybil called over to a diner girl with a long burgundy dress who was retrieving water out of a well. How are you? Hey, Sybil, she laughed. Looks like you're certainly having a lot of fun today. Oh, I am, Maria, Sybil replied with a bit of snark. But not more fun than you, surely. I'm getting water for the cows, Maria said as she put her hand on her hip. The ginger looked over to me and lifted an eyebrow before looking back at Sybil. Oh, well, bless you, Sybil said sweetly. I'm sure those cows will appreciate that. In fact, I'm sure they appreciate all you do for them. They certainly do, Maria said, and she forced a smile. Anyway, I have some real work to do, so I can't stand around and chat. Maybe I'll see you later. Sybil. Oh, I'm quite busy these days, Maria, Sybil laughed. So it might be a while before I have the chance to just sit down and talk. But I'm sure I could squeeze in some time to catch up with old friends soon. Maria offered another fake smile that looked like a sneer before she turned and walked away with her bucket. Okay, Tabitha giggled behind me. That looked like a friendly interaction. But I know for a fact that it wasn't. I know that tone of voice, and Sybil, if you don't mind me saying, I've never seen you act like such a bitch. Oh, don't give me a hard time, Sybil said, and even though I couldn't see Her face, I could tell that she was rolling her eyes. Maria Chaucer has been tormenting me ever since I was a child. Her family thought they were better than us because they bred cattle instead of pigs. Also, my mother and I were practicing witches, and she had no witches in her family at all. Most people have respect for that kind of thing, but not the Chaucers. They consider it unclean. In fact, she never let me play with her and her friends because she was afraid I'd hex them. Sounds like they were jealous, Imelda said in a gentle voice. I can't think of any other reason why they would act that way around someone with magical gifts such as yours. Well, Maria always had more friends than I did, Sybil sighed. All of the maidens in the village, in fact. But it didn't matter to me because I always preferred to play music with my brothers and roam around the woods looking for plants rather than play dress-up with Maria. And look at me now. I'm about to marry Sir Henry Baker, eternal savior of Lupercalia. Don't be too loud, Tabitha hissed. I don't want to ruin the surprise. I'd never imagined Sybil as the catty type, even if she did tease Tabitha sometimes. But that was always in good fun, and Tabitha gave as good as she got. I realized that stock was just like small towns everywhere, and so I shouldn't have been surprised that there were popular girls and unpopular girls. Up there to the right, Tabitha said, and she pointed past my head at a cottage further up on a hill surrounded by fenced fields. The thatched roof cottage didn't look like the other stone and wood cottages in town. Sybil's family home was round rather than the usual box, and it had been painted white so that it shone like a beacon among the dull browns of the rest of the town. The windows were arched rather than squared, though the thatched roof and stone chimney looked like the usual neighborhood staples. Hey, Sybil said. How do you know where I live? It's literally my talent, Sybil, Tabitha said. I'm good at remembering where things are. I'm the best navigator in all of Lupercalia, or have you forgotten that? Well, maybe not in all of Lupercalia, Sybil offered. I'm sure there might be some other blue blood out there that could challenge you. Yeah, my unborn child, Tabitha snapped. Ladies, I snorted. We're here on serious business. I nudged Casanova forward again, and as we got closer I could see that the area behind the fence was a green field full of pigs. A small wooden shelter had been built nearby, and one very fat pig was currently sprawled in the doorway while the rest of the herd munched on the grass. Smells like pigs, Tabitha commented. Smells like a farm, I corrected as I felt the first raindrops hit my face. There he is, Sybil said. There's my dad. A man emerged from the wooden shelter as we approached the field of pigs. He was wearing long beige pants tucked into brown leather work boots and a white tunic with a brown vest. He wiped his brow as he threw some grain for the pigs, and he called each pig by name as he offered it some of the food. When we were about 20 yards away, he spotted us and lifted his hand to wave. The pigs noticed and looked up as well, but the swine were not nearly as happy to see us. The pigs started squealing as they ran for the far end of the field, despite the grain that still littered the grass. Is that okay? I asked Sybil as her dad made his way over to the fence. Don't worry, she said. It's totally fine. They just rarely see direwolves, so they'll probably run around for a little before settling down and rolling in the mud. Good thing it's raining too. Wow, Sybil, you know so much about pigs, Tabitha remarked. Come on, girls, I said before Sybil could reply. I'll tie up Casanova and, hopefully, your dad will allow us inside before it starts to pour. Oh, he will, the folk witch laughed. I swung my legs over the direwolf and hopped off. Sybil and Imelda followed, and I helped Tabitha off of Casanova, much to her chagrin. No, 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 she said as she batted away my hands. I'm not an invalid. No, but you're a lady, and a pregnant one at that, I added. I won't let you strain yourself unnecessarily. Fine, she huffed. But only while I'm pregnant. Of course, I assured her as we walked toward the gate. Daddy! Sybil yelled as she ran toward her father. The witch looked like she was flying across the ground, and her father had a huge smile on his face as he stepped through the gate and closed it behind him. I thought for sure that Sybil would wrap him in a giant hug, but she skidded to a stop in front of him and gave him a peck on the cheek instead. After all that, Tabitha muttered. That's all we get? She doesn't want to get covered in mud, Imelda whispered. How glamorous, Tabitha said under her breath. Sybil's dad had gray hair, a gray beard, and the same kind green glowing eyes. Sybil He was still smiling as the rest of us approached, and he gave me a nod in place of a handshake. And I suppose that this is Sir Henry Baker, the most eternal savior of Lupercalia? He asked. He bent down on one knee and bowed his head, just like the nobles had done. Oh please, I said as I lay my hand on his shoulder. It's raining and I don't want you to get your clothes dirty. I'm a pig farmer, Sir Henry, he said with a laugh as he dusted his hands on his shirt. So my clothes are always dirty. I know that my son has met you, but I don't believe we've been formally introduced. My name is Gothic Foreman, and I am the head of the Foreman family. Don't let mother hear you say that too loudly, Sybil giggled, and she took her father's muddy hand in hers. No, you're probably right, he laughed. And who are your other friends? Dad, Sybil said and glanced at the sky. I'd love to introduce you to everyone, but it's seriously starting to rain out here. Can't we do this inside? I was too polite to say it, but Sybil was right. What had previously only been a small shower had turned into a barrage of marble-sized raindrops that bounced off my chainmail. Oh goodness, Gosel said and shook his head. I suppose you're right. I'm sorry ladies, but I usually just keep working no matter what the weather is. But I know such fine ladies as yourselves would rather be inside where it's warm and dry. Don't worry about it, Tabitha laughed. I love to dance in the rain. And rain is just another miracle we can thank the moon goddess for, Imelda added as she pushed a few damp strands of hair from her face. Just one thing before we head inside, I said as I started to undo the leather belts that held the bundle around Casanova's belly. Beautiful direwolf, by the way, Gosel added as he looked on. Does he have a name? Casanova, I answered, and Gosel gave me a puzzled look. Interesting name, he said with a shrug. Sounds like something from the South Country. Yeah, I said. It's from an old story in my hometown, sort of. I finally undid the last strap, and Sybil shot me an excited look as I took the large sack from Casanova's back, and then gestured at Gosel to carry the other side. The witch's father obliged, and we started up the path to the cottage with the sack swinging between us. Will Casanova be okay? Tabitha asked as she looked at the excited canine, who was following behind us. I don't want him to catch a cold. Oh, don't worry, Gosel wheezed as we made our way up to the cottage. He can shelter in the herb garden. It's just behind the house, and there's a covered work area that should be high enough to protect him. I looked back and saw that Casanova was skipping around as he tried to catch raindrops with his big pink tongue. Despite his massive size, my direwolf was still just a puppy, and I knew he still spent much of his day in play. But I loved him for it, and I felt like it helped keep me young in a way too. I think he's fine in the rain, I said. But if it gets worse, I'll make sure he finds the cover. We do have to ride him home, Tabitha said, and our butts will get soaked if he's not dry by then. It'll be fine, I assured her. Sybil darted ahead and opened the door so Mr. Foreman and I could carry the bundle into the house. The first thing I noticed as soon as I stepped inside was that the cottage smelled like the hut in the woods where I'd first met Sybil. The scents of rosemary, sage, and different flowers that I didn't even know mingled in the air, and the atmosphere was warm and smoky. There were herbs drying from the ceiling, just as there had been in the cottage, and the center of the house was lit by a metal furnace with a long chimney that reached toward the ceiling. The place was covered in pots, pans, and worn but comfortable furniture, and I was sure the windows let in plenty of sunlight on less rainy days. Even though it was small and it looked like there was only one other room in the back, it had a homey atmosphere that somehow reminded me of growing up with my family in New Jersey. Gosel and I placed the heavy bundle on the floor, and he slapped his hands together and barked at the two men sitting on a large floppy pink couch on the other side of the room. I thought you two were in town, he said as the young men immediately shot to their feet. We were in town, the guy on the left said, and he looked at me and smiled. I recognized him as Darius, Sybil's brother, whom I'd met once before in town. He was wearing the same light-colored pants and tunic as his dad, though he'd topped his outfit off with a brown woolen vest. Like his father and sister, he had green eyes and jet-black hair instead of the older man's gray, but there was no denying the family connection. The man to his right, on the other hand, looked quite different. He had lighter, sandy-colored hair, and slightly less intense eyes that were still green but didn't shine as much as his siblings. Oh yes, so you were in town but didn't think to help your old father do the afternoon feedings? Gossel asked. What do I keep you boys around here for? Oh come, father. The man on the right laughed. We have visitors. Now isn't the time for another lecture. Darius walked over and gave me a firm handshake, accompanied by a cheeky smile. Hank, he said. It's such a pleasure to see you again. I will thank you boys to address Knights of the Realm by their official title. In this house, Gossel snapped. Oh really, it's fine, I added with a laugh. They don't need to address me like that. I'm Euronymous, the other brother said as he held out his hand to shake. It's a great honor to meet you, Sir Henry Baker, and an even greater honor to have you in our home. It's a pleasure to meet you all finally, I said with a smile as I grasped his hand. Sybil often talks about you. Excuse me, Sybil said as she sidled to the front. But why is nobody more excited to see me? I am your flesh and blood after all. The witch tapped her foot on the floor, and both brothers rolled their eyes. That's exactly why, Darius laughed. You're our flesh and blood. We see you all the time. I've been gone, Sybil pointed out. A mere drop in the bucket compared to the years we spent trying to lose you. In the woods, Euronymous pointed out. Yet you always found your way home. Big brothers can be so cruel, Imelda laughed. Yes, they can, Sybil agreed. Your friends, however, are guests, Euronymous said as he gestured to Imelda. And Tabitha. And ones we've never met. It would be very rude if we did not remedy that. Gossel rolled his eyes as both Darius and Euronymous kissed Imelda and Tabitha's hands. This is a very fitting welcome for a lady such as myself, Tabitha said as the door slammed shut again. Gossel, there's a giant black dog in the herb garden, a woman's voice announced. I think it's a direwolf pup, but it's not one of Sir Charles's mounts. Dear, Gossel said and motioned toward me and my girls. We have guests. We turned around and found ourselves looking at an older version of Sybil. The woman's skin was crisscrossed with wrinkles, and her black hair had turned gray, but she had the same face and the same long neck. The only thing that surprised me was that her green eyes matched Euronymous rather than Sybil, so Sybil had obviously inherited her glowing eyes from her father. How do you do? I said politely as I took in the long black leather dress and silver necklace with a vial that made Sybil's mom look like a hard rocker. Goth MILF. This is my wife Willow, Gossel announced. Sybil. Willow cried happily and pulled her daughter into a tight hug. I laughed as the two witches embraced. Mom, you're going to squish me, Sybil said as she squirmed in her mother's grasp. I'm in pain. No, you're not, girl, Willow Foreman replied with a cackle. And why have you brought that massive bundle with you of, what is it, moonbeams? The witch held her nose in the air and sniffed a few times before nodding. Yep, you're right, Sybil laughed. It's moonbeams. Are you traveling to sell them? Gossel asked. I may know of a few county markets in the North Country that'd be interested in moonbeams from this good soil, especially as we're so close to the castle. That's not why, I said and did my own bit of squirming as everyone turned to look at me. Sybil's mother crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow at me before looking back and forth between me, her sons, Sybil, and the girls. I smell something, she said, and it isn't just the moonbeams. Oh, Gossel said and looked at his daughter. Is there something you need to tell us? I saw Sybil shrug as if to say that this was as good of an opportunity as any to get my proposal in, so I took a deep breath and addressed the family. Foreman family, I said. As you might know, Sybil and I have grown quite close over the past few months. We reside at my estate, which is southeast of here, as I'm sure Sybil has told you. She has told us these things in the letters she writes, yes, Gossel said. Which is quite an improvement because she never wrote to us before. I was a nomad, father, Sybil groaned. It's not like I could just find a messenger in the middle of the forest. You're a witch, you know which way the birds fly, Sybil's mother scolded. But yes, Henry, since she's been at the estate she's been writing to us regularly about her new life. And I must thank you because she seems happy with it. I'm glad to hear that, I said and squeezed Sybil's hand, because I've come with a very important request. I would like to take Sybil's hand in marriage. The family went silent for a long moment, and nobody moved or even breathed. Willow finally broke the spell first when she looked at old Gossel for several seconds and then nudged him to say something. Gosel, she whispered. This is your duty. Sybil. Darius asked and crossed his arms. You actually want to marry my sister? Shut your mouth, Darius. Willow scolded, and she dabbed a teardrop from her. My boy, Gosel said with a laugh, and the pig farmer bounded over and squeezed me. I felt like all the air was being squeezed out of me as Gosel picked me up and swung me around. I was impressed since I wouldn't have guessed that the man was so strong, but he swung me around like I was just another sack of grain. This is a most happy day, Willow cackled, and I watched as her and Imelda joined hands and started to dance around in circles. Once Gosel put me down, Sybil's brother came toward me and slapped me on the back. So now we have a knight for a brother, Hieronymus laughed. We will be kings in no time. Don't speak like that, Gosel said, and he pointed a muddy finger at his eldest son. You know that we farmers are important to this kingdom too, but I must admit, it's nice to know that there will be a noble in the family. Oh, it's a wonderful thing for sure, Tabitha purred. Sybil stuck her tongue out at the noble, who only winked in reply. Despite the teasing, it was clear that the Formans were happy with my proposal. Still, I wanted to actually hear someone say yes before we started making our wedding plans. So I laughed. It's official? You guys are okay with me marrying your daughter? Suddenly, the 4 other Formans roared in laughter. Of course, Gosel said, and I could swear that his emerald green eyes were becoming misty with tears of joy. Sybil was glowing with happiness as she did a little happy dance. Her emerald green eyes were also a little misty, and she giggled at me before she wrapped her arm around my waist. Oh, Hank, she said. I never believed that anyone could make my family so happy. I couldn't ask to marry a better man than you. He's certainly better than anyone that Maria girl is marrying, Darius said, with a wink. We actually ran into her on the way here, Imelda replied. It sounds like Sybil has quite a history with her. Who cares? Hieronymus laughed. My sister is to be married. It's a day I thought I'd never see for as long as I lived. Oh, don't say that, Sybil scolded, and the witch hit him lightly on his arm. Just a moment, Willow said, and all the attention in the house turned to the witch, who was holding out a long elegant finger in the air. What is it? Gosel asked in a suddenly concerned voice. Is it a vision or something? No, she said and shook her head. No, nothing like that. But I must find Pigeon. We must alert the petty noble of stock to come immediately to hear the good news. The first Foreman child to wed. It is a momentous day indeed. I'd love to deliver the news to Charles, I replied. He's the man who helped me find my way here in Lupercalia. I'll send the message immediately, Sybil's mother declared as she hurried out of the house. I don't know what she did to those pigeons, Gosel muttered, but they're like an army. They'll go anywhere she goes, fly anywhere she says. As strange. It's not strange, Sybil insisted. Maybe if you're a witch, Tabitha cooed. But to us ordinary folk it's strange. When have you ever been ordinary? Sybil asked as she rolled her eyes. Tabitha mused. You have a point. I shook my head and grinned at Gosel Foreman. The pig farmer looked like his mind was 1,000 miles away, and I couldn't blame him. I was already picturing a weekly meeting with Sybil's dad, maybe for a pint of mead at the stock tavern. We'd discuss our crazy witch wives and what they'd been up to that day, and laugh over the failed experiments. I thought back to my parents too. They would have loved to know that I was finally marrying one of the finest women I'd ever met in my life. They might think that marrying a few of them was a little weird, but it was a different type of life I was leading in Lupercalia, and once they'd met both women, I was sure they'd understand why I couldn't choose between them. Boys, come now, Gosel said as he came out of his trance, and he ushered his sons to a large rosewood box that was behind the fireplace. We know what we must do. For a second I felt an ominous chill as they reached into the box. Had they been lying and they were about to bludgeon me to death or something? Every folk horror film I'd ever watched suddenly ran through my head, and the procession at the end of the Wicker Man came to me in full color as Sybil's grip around my waist tightened. But when Darius Foreman produced a 9-string lyre from the box and Hieronymus pulled out a drum, I took a deep sigh of relief. I knew that Sybil was from a musical family, and I'd heard the witch play her flute often enough, but I had yet to see the rest of her family play. Oh, how enchanting, Imelda said, and the priestess glowed with excitement. I knew that there would be a wedding song. She flung her arms up in the air and did a little twirl around Tabitha, who was leaning against a window. I do love a song, Tabitha said with a shrug, and the noble started to dance with Imelda and twirl her around her arm. Then let us begin, Gossel Foreman laughed as he pulled out a fiddle. I think we know the only song that is appropriate to follow a proposal. The trio played a few notes, but before they could really get going, the door was flung open again and Willow marched into the room. She scowled at the men of the family, and the instruments went quiet. Unbelievable, she said and pointed her finger at Gossel. That you would think to sing without me. Darling, I couldn't imagine such a thing, Gossel said with a wink, and the witch pretended to roll her eyes as she caressed his ear. Ah, I remember when my mother sang this when you proposed to me, she sighed. It's the most heartbreaking tale. I had a feeling I'd heard this song before, when we'd met Sally and in the inn. Oh, I know this one, Imelda said mid-twirl. It's the maiden and the so. Oh yes, Tabitha said as she struggled to keep a straight face. It's that song about a pig that gets married. Yes, Gossel said as he lifted his fiddle to his shoulder and tuned the strings. Let me just. The sons waited patiently for their father to finish while Willow hummed the song as she swayed back and forth. When Gossel was happy with the violin, he nodded to his family and then raised the bow. At the ready, Formans, Hieronymus said, and he shot Sybil a look. I have to join them, she whispered as she moved away from me. Hieronymus started beating rhythmically at the little drum, and soon Darius joined in with a little harp riff. Soon after that, Gossel joined in with some longer, more drawn-out notes, and Sybil and her mother began to hum. The effect was mesmerizing. The way their instruments came together made it sound like one heartbeat thrumming throughout the entire small cottage. And then, Gossel gestured at Sybil and her mother, and they started to sing. The maiden and the sow. The best of mates they were. And when she ventured through the field, that great pig followed her. And through the hills and dales they trekked, until they found a boar. That pig got married then and there. The best of mates no more. The men played a heartfelt reprise with the violin taking the part of the voices, and then Hieronymus riffed a drum solo that finally brought the song to an end. Ah, what a tune, Imelda said in her dreamy voice, and she waved her arms over her head. With her red suede gear, her long platinum hair, and her wavy dancing, she would have fit right in at a Grateful Dead concert. Then again, so would Sybil. It was only Tabitha who had an extra edge to her, and whenever she rimmed her eyes with black liner, she reminded me of Sherry Curry. That was amazing, everyone, I said, and I started to clap. The family took their bows, and Sybil made an extra curtsy. We've only played it at every village fete for the past 100 years. Practically, Hieronymus laughed. This time it's different, Gossel snapped as he elbowed his son in the ribs. It's one of our own little piglets that will be wed. I like to think of Sybil as my little piglet as well, Tabitha interjected, with a wink. By the goddess, that's given me an idea, Gossel said, and he shoved his violin and bow in Imelda's arms and ran out of the house. Oh, what fine craftsmanship, Imelda said as she studied the fiddle, which looked like it had once been the property of a middle schooler who only played violin because his parents made him. You must think our home is chaos, Henry, Willow said with a low laugh. And you'd be right. But there is a great deal of love in this home, and we're glad to welcome you into the Foreman clan. I'm glad to be part of it, I replied. It's an honor. I didn't notice how loud everything had been since my proposal until there were about 30 seconds of calm. Then before I knew it, the door slammed open again with such force that a few dried rose petals fell from the ceiling. Gossel, Willow scolded. It's not as if those only sprout once a season. I'll have you know. Yes, dear, he laughed, and he ushered in another figure. It was Charles. The petty noble closed the door politely behind him and looked over to me. He was wearing a blue suede tunic with long sleeves and black suede pants with chainmail covering both of them. His eyes glistened with pride, and the noble wrapped his arms around my neck and gave me a hearty pat on the back. Hank, he laughed loudly into my ear. I had a feeling that this would be only a matter of time. And might I say, it's truly the most wondrous occasion. He pulled away from me and opened his mouth to say something, but when he did so, a tiny pig squeal came out instead. Charles, I said, and suddenly a hearty laugh boomed from behind. Charles. That one never fails, Gossel said as he held up a tiny pink creature in his hand. The bubblegum pink piglet had a large, round head and bright blue eyes. He had been wrapped in a linen cloth, but his little hooves dangled out of Gossel's hands. The piglet looked happy, and he squirmed with excitement as he looked around at all the people in the room. Oh, how cute, I said as I accepted the pig. Hey there, little guy. This is one of our prized little ones, Gossel said. Born far too early in the season, but just as healthy and strong as a springtime piglet. Not only is he prized, Darius added, he's the only one of this first litter that survived. So one might venture to say that he's chosen. It's sad, but that's farm life for you. Oh, excellent, an off-peak pig, Tabitha said as she ventured over. He looks delicious. Can you think about anything but food these days? Sybil asked, and Tabitha shot her a look as if to say that there were too many big secrets to reveal. For one day. Well, he might be if that's what you're after, Gossel said with a sigh. But I was thinking he'd be an excellent companion, not only to you but to the direwolf too. It's great to get the species to mix so the wolf learns not to attack the pigs and the pigs learn that the wolf will protect them, and they can share other tricks as well. That's some old Lupercalian farmer knowledge for you there. Oh, he's right, Imelda said with a smile. He'll be an excellent friend for Casanova. Can I hold him? Of course, I said with a laugh, and I handed the tiny piglet over to the eager priestess. Oh, what a treasure, the ex-vampire said, and I could tell that she was trying to hold back tears. When one thinks of all the wonderful marvels of the goddess, all her beautiful little creatures, just like you, baby one. She held the piglet up to her face, and it snorted a few times before licking her nose. This is a great day for the village of Stock, Charles said with a laugh. And I'm sure that you are all eager to celebrate. But since the village is under my charge, I thought I'd invite you all to my manor for a feast first. How does that sound? A feast, Darius said, and he and Hieronymus turned to each other. I'd love a feast, Hieronymus said. After all the hard work you two have done today, Gossel said and raised his eyebrow. But yes, Charles, we'd be most honored to accept your invitation for a feast. Bring the pig, Tabitha said with a wink. Oh, Miss Blueclaw, Charles sighed as he wrapped his arm around her. I never thought that I'd see the likes of you on a pig farm in my beautiful little village. Do you know what? Tabitha replied in a sweet voice, and her brown eyes twinkled as she looked up at the nobleman. Neither did I. Let's go home to your estate, Charles. Sybil and I rolled our eyes at each other, but there was no denying that we loved Tabitha to the ends of the earth, even if she was a little bit of a brat. What are we waiting for? Darius laughed. A party awaits. We squeezed out of the cottage and back into the fresh air. The rain had ended, so everything smelled fresh and clean. It was still overcast, but sunlight was already starting to peek through the clouds, and one bright ray even cast a golden halo around our little scene. I don't think I've ever seen that many people in the cottage at once, Sybil laughed as Casanova appeared. But it's certainly been a very fun day. Perhaps even the most fun day of my life. What about when we went to the fairground and you ate about 90 donuts? Tabitha asked. It seemed like you had a lot of fun doing that. Charles shot an odd look over at us when Tabitha mentioned both the fairground and donuts, but he shrugged and hopped atop Bertie, who had been snoozing next to the pig pen. Do you know what, Tabitha? Sybil asked. I did have a lot of fun eating those. I know, honey, Tabitha said, and in a rare moment of sincerity she threw her arms around Sybil and squeezed her. Oh, Tabby cat, Sybil said with a grin. Congratulations on getting married, Sybil, Tabitha sighed before pulling away. You know, things won't be the same without you around here, and I'll surely miss you. Oh, be quiet, Sybil said with an eye roll, and she beckoned for Casanova to come meet us. The big black direwolf trotted over with his tongue hanging out, a sure sign. He was happy to see us. He seemed eager to be on the loose again now that he'd shed the bundle of beans, and he barked happily at Bertie when the older direwolf stirred himself from his nap. Look, Casanova, it's a new friend, Imelda said, and the priestess held the piglet up to Casanova. The piglet was about the size of Casanova's nose, and I was pretty sure that He could have eaten it like a Sour Patch Kid if he so chose. But instead the massive dog sniffed at the tiny pig before giving him a friendly slurp with his big pink tongue. The piglet squealed with joy and started to wiggle around. He snorted a few snorts before Imelda let him give Casanova a nibble on the ear, which the direwolf seemed to enjoy immensely. So wonderful, Imelda sighed. They're bonding. I can already tell that they are going to be the best of friends. You know what, boys? Tabitha said with a nod. I have the feeling that this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. Come on, everyone, I said as I slid over Casanova's neck. Let's go to Charles's house. I couldn't wait to hang out with my best friend after my very first wedding proposal. As the girls slid on top of Casanova's back, I got a kick out of the fact that most guys only look forward to one proposal in their life. But I was only just getting started.